Guy Odishaw is the co-founder of CerebralFit. It's a bioelectric company translating medical research into optimal brain health and working to take on chronic conditions like dementia, anxiety, depression, and ADHD, helping people to train your brain. Guy, excited to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your personal life, some more about your work, and why you do what you do.
Sure. So I've been a practitioner for a little over 30 years. Started off in what's called integrative manual therapy. And then I've always had kind of a parallel track, just kind of the entrepreneurial side of me. So I, also worked creating integrative clinics along the way, worked as a consultant. So I, University of Minnesota, created one of the first integrative clinics in the student healthcare system, but at the same time kind of maintained a private practice, and then eventually left the U, started my own clinic, Bhakti Wellness Center, to eventually we grew into be one of the largest integrative medicine clinics in the country, kind of, and I'd say largest and most diverse, in that we had MDs, chiropractors, mental health, traditional Chinese medicine, massage, body work, acupuncture, coaches, hypnotherapy, a very eclectic group of people, all working together, in an integrative manner to support, optimal patient outcomes. So that's been my baby for about 18 years has been that. And then again, kind of back to my, personal career as a practitioner, integrated manual therapies to bioelectric medicine, and then more specifically into brain health and working in neuroimaging, neurofeedback, neurostimulation, and brings me roughly to today.
Here we are. So I imagine you are a very, very curious person who's always pulling strings and following where they go and interested in learning. What was it about, or what was it that said, you know what, it's time to start this company?
Sure. So, CerebralFit, really where that came from was my partner, Dr. Jeff Grobot, Biomed Center there in Arizona. He and I, just as two veteran clinicians, he's got a couple of big clinics, I've got a couple of big clinics, and he was interested in what I was doing in bioelectric medicine, and so he flew some of his clinic staff up to my clinic, and we spent some time together looking at processes. And but in that conversation was just our own kind of acknowledgement of the challenges of working with large staffs, some of the inefficiencies of a brick and mortar clinic, and then what technology has brought us today in terms of ability to do healthcare at home with many, often more efficiencies than what we can do in the clinic. So between the two of us, just seeing that we, had this very similar path and set of frustrations and visions, we, collaborated, formed CerebralFit, where we use bioelectric medicine, so mostly devices, to put together treatment plans for people to do it at home care. And then that's really what we do. So that was the impetus was, how do we make healthcare more efficient? And then how do we, as practitioners, lower the stress level in our lives? And those two ideas led to CerebralFit.
Excellent. So for people who are experiencing chronic conditions, walk me through what they put something on their head.
Sure. Yeah. Great question. So maybe I'll just quickly say like what our products are. So talk about putting it on your head. So we have our near infrared helmet, and then we have an audiovisual entrainment system. So glasses for photic entrainment, headphones for auditory entrainment, and then transcranial stimulation. So 3 modalities in one device, fantastic little device. Then we have a nasal laser and ear lasers. So that's in one device, nasal laser, ear laser in one device. And we've got a series of red light mouth guards, so we can work on oral health as well. So getting light into the oral cavity. And then microcurrent therapy. And then we have panels for red infrared light for the body. And so that's kind of the array of devices right now. I imagine that will expand over time, but this is we have 7 devices that we use. We focus primarily on the brain, but we also do bodies. But with CerebralFit, we really are front facing as brains, and primarily neurodegenerative conditions. So dementia, Parkinson's, dystonia, things of that nature. But that extends to, say, for example, macular degeneration, which you could say is dementia of the eye. And actually, one of the earliest places that dementia can be assessed or predicted is on the retina, and what's happening in the retina. And a person might be presenting with something that seems like macular degeneration, but is really the prelude to a full-on dementia. And so our primary target is the brain, neurodegenerative diseases, but also traumatic brain injury, anxiety, depression, ADHD. From our side, when we talk about the brain, the way we think about it is, rather than in terms of these conditions, these diagnostic labels, we think of it as dysregulation. Like, for us, everything is just dysregulation. And if you can regulate the dysregulation, we can often ameliorate somebody's symptoms. And in a way, it makes complete sense to think about it in this kind of simple form, but it's not how our healthcare system looks at it. It will take something like schizophrenia and ADHD and see them as completely different, when from a brain standpoint, they're actually not that different in terms of the nature of the dysregulation, where it's happening. The areas that are involved are different, but the nature of the dysregulation itself is actually remarkably similar.
So dysregulation, if you would give me a quick definition of that.
Sure. So there's, boy, how do I say? So there's kind of a standard model of the brain, which very quickly is becoming to be seen as not so much incorrect, but grossly limited. But it's handy in that it simplifies things, makes it easier to talk about, but it's also what people who are even somewhat familiar with the brain it's the model they have. So I will use that model and then kind of correct myself. So the way to think about it is there's the brain waves, kind of the language of the brain: delta, theta, alpha, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, gamma. So we've got the language of the brain. And we think about it in terms of parts of the brain talking to each other. So your frontal lobe will talk to your occipital lobe, it'll talk to your parietal lobe. And then we can break that down even further into the Brodmann areas, so they get much smaller. And so you got, Brodmann area 22 talking to Brodmann area 47, and in this conversation. So dysregulation might be that we're supposed to have a conversation happening from one area to another area at 7 hertz. But for whatever reason, maybe we don't know, that conversation is happening at 10 hertz instead of 7 hertz. That would be a little bit like if all of a sudden in the middle of this conversation, I started to talk, in Greek, and assuming you don't speak Greek, you would have a difficult time understanding me. Even though we are still talking to each other, I'm now speaking a different language. Right? So it's the same thing. If one area that's usually talking to another area at 7 hertz, so in theta, all of a sudden is talking in alpha, it's changed its language. Well, the other area can't understand it. So now we have a breakdown in information flow. And the brain, is a way to think about it is this incredible multidimensional information processing system. Energy and information is moving around at incredible speeds in multiple layers, in multiple forms all the time. And what we think of as computation, or information that is being, data that's being crunched in one area that is then forwarded to another area that is then forwarded to another area. And then at some point that makes up part of our reality, right? And when we talk about the brain, we think about the brain in terms of thinking, right? But the brain is equally running our metabolism. So it's, what is our hormones doing? What is our blood sugar up to? What's our temperature regulation? What are, our organs, what are they producing? Is our intestines digesting? So the brain is running all of it. So breakdown in the brain processing isn't just about errant thinking, right? Whether like I think about my memory or we always think, again, we think about the brain in terms of cognition, but it's running everything. So when we have this kind of breakdown in communication, it erodes the information that's moving through. So then the system, and whether it's thought, executive function planning, or digestion, is operating on degraded information. And the way I like to think of it is, if you're listening, for those of us who are old enough to remember radios that you turn the dial, right, and the little thing moves along the copper wires. Yep. So if you're a little bit off and the station is a little bit fuzzy, so you're missing like maybe every third word, it doesn't take very long, and you've lost the plot of the story you're listening to, right? And so it's the same thing, in our brain. If even a little bit of the information is getting dropped out because of dysregulation, pretty soon that system loses the plot, right? And so this is dysregulation. Yeah,
that makes a ton of sense. And I imagine that this is a process which maybe our brains naturally, it happens as I age, and then obviously if I have some kind of an injury, that will just screw everything up. And you are now working to, I apologize for being so crude, but I think you get the idea.
No, absolutely, right. There's any number of things that can knock up, because the brain, again, it's a very robust, resilient, with multiple levels of redundancy. So it's incredibly resilient, but also incredibly sensitive. So something like a high fever could throw off our thalamocortical loop, the timing mechanism. Certainly something like a concussion, even a mild concussion, a few miles an hour, could be enough to throw off the timing mechanism, or again, how two areas are communicating with each other. And so it can take very little to do it. And on the other hand, we know, like in some of the kind of non-neurotypical side of things, whether it's in psychology or neuroscience, there can be people who are living a completely normal life, even a high performance life, and find out they have a condition called hydrocephaly, where they have, compared to a kind of a neurotypical brain, they only have a fraction of the amount of brain, yet they're living a completely normal life and never would have known unless something had happened that led them to have an MRI, find out that they have this condition. So again, the conundrum of the brain and its complexity. Yeah.
It's fascinating. So
yeah,
should everybody be paying attention to this, or just when I notice things are going wrong?
Sure. That's a fantastic question. So many of our devices I refer to as the toothbrush of the brain, right? Which is, we brush our teeth twice a day, every day, for as long as we want to have teeth. And when you're done with your teeth, stop brushing, right? And the brain is the same way, right? We should be doing something to directly take care of it. And for the most part, for the longest time in medicine, the brain has been kind of this locked box. We've had to go at it indirectly. So we talk about diet and lifestyle, which is still a big part of, say, the Bredesen protocol for addressing dementia. They're primarily focused on diet and lifestyle, which is important, but it's an indirect approach. Or take psychology, an indirect approach to the brain through the mind. Fantastic, it's great, but it's indirect. Here, now we have technologies that are allowing us to have access to the organ itself, so we can work directly with the brain and not try and go indirect through other systems. So something like transcranial photobiomodulation, so the helmet with near infrared light that we can get into the brain, or the audiovisual entrainment device, which speaks the language of the brain, in that it uses the brain waves through pulsed light to change neural firing patterns. right? So I think of it as like exercise for the brain or nutrition for the brain, those as models to think about, right? So again, if you go to your nutritionist and say, hey, I'm feeling kind of sluggish, I'd maybe like to lose a little bit of weight, I'd like to have more lean muscle mass and less adipose. And so your nutritionist puts together a great plan for you. Then you ask them, well, how often should I eat this healthy meal? Should I do this once a week? Like, would that be good? And your nutritionist might say, well, maybe we could get, one good meal a day, right? Could you do that? Well, boy, that seems like an awful lot. But what you really want is you want to have 3 good meals a day, every day for the rest of your life. Like, that just intuitively makes sense. So it's similar for the brain. If you have the technology to be able to directly exercise the brain and have all these kind of healthy benefits to the brain, one would want to do that every day. And that's kind of my general prescription is we should do something good for our brain every day because it's our brain.
Because obviously we should, but if I'm not thinking about being mindful, let's see how many more puns I can throw in there about my brain. So it's light, sound. We're getting it through our ears, our eyes. I heard you say orally.
Yep. Correct. Through the skull, through the helmet, the transcranial photobiomodulation. And then the transcranial stimulation, part of the audiovisual entrainment device, which is, so you've usually done with ear clips, put on ear clips and deliver basically a microcurrent, alternating microcurrent into the brain, which it's a very, very, very mild, like you don't feel it. But what's great about transcranial stimulation is, it's a fancy term here, it normalizes the resting membrane potential of a neuron, right? It's like, what does that mean? So a way to think about it, and this is really overgeneralizing, so I apologize for that, but you could think about anxiety as neurons that fire too easily, and depression as neurons that don't fire easily enough. It takes more stimulation to get the neurons to fire in depression, and in anxiety, too little stimulation makes them fire. Right? So we can roughly think of these conditions in this way. So if you have something that kind of normalizes the resting membrane potential, it brings anxiety down and it brings depression up. In a very simple, non-invasive, no side effects, just a gentle trickle charge to the brain. Right? And great research to show that, say, something like transcranial stimulation, when compared to SSRIs for anxiety, depression, OCD, it's about 3 times as effective. So, great, kind of statistical power in the research to show its efficacy, and no negative side effects.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
So how do I know, how do I get started? You've got 7 devices and all these different things, and I don't know. I'm just,
sure.
If I'm feeling like there's something wrong with me, or I'm just feeling like I want to optimize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a great place to start is we offer consults. So we can do a free 15-minute consult for somebody who's just kind of curious, want to generally know if they're heading in the right direction or not, if they're a good candidate. And then we do a longer consult, 45-minute consult, which allows me to go through a person with their health history, what's going on, what have they tried, what's been successful, what hasn't been successful, put together a treatment plan for them, go through that treatment plan of what's the cost going to be, what's their actual day-to-day lived experience of compliance going to be, what can we anticipate for outcomes. Then if a person feels like, yeah, that sounds like something I want to do, I'll put together then a device or a suite of devices, ship them to the person. We'll hop on a Zoom call when they get them. We'll go through how to set them up, how to do their treatment, what protocols to run. And then I stay with them and monitor them over time. And whether that's, in 2 weeks we're talking again, or in 6 months, or in 3 years, we're always here to have those conversations, to modify based on what's happening, in the person's health, in their life, like that. But a great place to start is just with the consult and find out if a person is a good candidate.
Excellent. Well, Guy, thank you so much for coming on. Tell us where we can learn more about everything and where we can schedule that consult.
Sure. CerebralFit.com. So cerebral, FIT.com. That's our website. People can reach me there. It'll have our phone number. It'll have my direct email address, access to the schedule, to schedule the consults, everything they need to know. There's mountains of research there. So if people want to find out what are the effects of near infrared light, what are the effects of audiovisual entrainment, what are the effects of transcranial stimulation, mountains of research available there so that people can see that these are legitimate areas of research and of medicine, and find out their safety and efficacy. And then if that all feels good, move forward with a consult.
Love it. Well, if you enjoyed as much as I did, show Guy your appreciation and share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Go to CerebralFit.com, CerebralFit.com, and check out everything that Guy has been sharing with us. Take advantage of that 15-minute consult and find out if there are ways to make life better and train your brain. Thanks again, Guy.
Thank you. Great to spend time with you.
Likewise. Until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.